this brief session, we will look at gaining an understanding of some common network terms. The terms that are covered are often misunderstood. So, firstly, welcome to the wonderful world of computing. It's great using technology to create a range of resources which can make materials available to suit your schedule and preferences. I hope you enjoy this brief session. So today we will define and understand the term bandwidth, throughput, latency, speed, and we're also going to look at what a router and a WAP are. So that's 6 network terms in total. So before we start, what's your understanding of the word bandwidth? Perhaps just have a little reflection on that for a moment. Bandwidth. So the definition, as I've written it here, is the maximum amount of data that can be transmitted over a given amount of time and is measured in gigabits per second. You also hear bandwidth mentioned in relation to Wi-Fi signals and routers and frequencies with that. So the easiest way to understand bandwidth is actually using an analogy. So if we look at this, the graphic of the bandwidth in the motorway with 24 cars packed in, the more lanes that you have on a motorway, the more cars that you can pack in, so 5 lanes, you could get more cars in, more cars and more data. Also, if you have less bandwidth or less lanes and a lot of data, that's where you get congestions and issues with cars or data not flowing well. So important to understand that bandwidth is just a theoretical measure. In the real world, you're unlikely to be able to have that many cars on a motorway or that number of bits of information travelling through, and the reasons for that are numerous. Okay, so let's look at throughput. Throughput is a measure of the actual amount of data passing through a connection. So if bandwidth is the total theoretical capacity, throughput is the actual real world or in practice measure of the data passing through a connection. So let's have a look at that graphic with the motorway analogy. So the bandwidth is theoretically what would be possible. Obviously on a motorway you couldn't have that situation. The throughput, 20 cars, even that would be unrealistic really. But the throughput, I think that kind of visual kind of illustrates the difference between the two. So let's have a look at speed next. It's often used interchangeably, meaning both bandwidth and throughput, but I think generally it's a measure of how much data can be downloaded or uploaded per second through a specific connection, and it's measured in megabits per second. I think it's obvious that the quicker you can upload and download data, then that's the best thing for us end users. I think we've all experienced issues with having issues of uploading or downloading, and certainly uploading data, and you may have seen issues with this when using Teams. Okay, so let's move on to latency, which is basically it's the amount of time that it takes for data to pass from one point on a network to the next. It's sometimes called the lag. Latency can have some pretty negative impacts on some types of teaching and learning. For example, it wouldn't be very good during a simulated clinical procedure if a patient or a simulated patient's response was delayed after an intervention. So you do something to a patient and you don't get a response 10 seconds later, ouch, that just wouldn't be very useful. So there's a whole range of reasons on a network that can cause latency. So in a nutshell, we've looked at bandwidth, throughput, latency and speed, and we've looked at an analogy of a motorway. However, we could just as easily have used an analogy of a pipe that's quite commonly used, or it could be a blood vessel. So the bandwidth is basically the measure of how the capacity of the pipe or the blood vessel. So the bigger the pipe, the more bandwidth that you have. The throughput is the transfer of data, water through the pipe or blood through the vessels during a specific time period, and it's different to the actual bandwidth. And then the latency measures the delay, how quickly does the data travel through that area in a given amount of time. Okay, so on the final bits now, what is a router? It basically forwards packets of data between computers, and they sort of like perform a traffic management function. The routers actually form the networks and manage the flow of data. And I'm sure that you're all familiar with routers. You probably have them at home. Some have some really crazy looking antennae. It's quite common now for the modems and routers to be integrated into one package. So this is an example of a network setup. So the wireless routers transmitting those radio signals on different frequencies. The modem is the traffic manager there, but you need the router and the modem on the network, and there's various reasons why the radio signals may not cover all areas or all devices have as good a signal as possible, but that's something else. But let's have a look at the final piece, which is what is a WAP. It's a wireless access point, and you will have seen these all around the education centre. They're basically a way of boosting the radio signal in areas which may have dead spots or a weak signal. They're best placed on the ceiling for maximum effectiveness, and I think there's some work to be done in the education centres with the management of the WAPs. So finally, the digital strategy outlines a number of plans which should help improve some of the networking issues in the ed centres, including the provision of Wi-Fi. So let's hope that all our devices are able to transmit, upload and download all our data quickly and without delay. So thanks for joining this session, and I hope you enjoyed it.